Good afternoon. This is Jason Dean, Film Fanatic, coming at you again. Got another new video coming up. It's gonna. I've been setting up the videos instead of like usually I've been doing the videos and then posting them right away. I've been uploading them to the YouTube channel and then, and then sharing them to various social media things, mostly Facebook. I usually share them to my own personal page, Jason Dean, and then also obviously the Film Fanatic Facebook page. So yeah, I usually do that, and but I'm trying to I'm gonna space out some videos, but I'm still recording a lot, and I'm gonna have like premieres. There's one coming up this that I believe is gonna be coming out tonight that I did the other day. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot about this. I'm a really I'm kind of lazy in a lot of ways, but I'm also a pretty slow learner, especially when it comes to technology. I have a real hard time, you know, diving into stuff that's pretty foreign as far as technological things. So it's a slow process, but I'm really enjoying it. The next thing I'm going to be getting into more and more is getting into, and again, this is going to be over a period of time. It's not going to be overnight, but I'm going to be getting into like more of a production element of doing these videos. I'll be using some, trying to use at some point some, graphics and try to make the page a little bit more sexy for whatever that means or whatever that could lead to. So we'll see. I'm gonna try to boost up the visual quality of the channel, and also maybe make it a little bit more appealing for people to check out. But I really appreciate people have been really supportive of it so far. And again, it's like most things I do, I just do them out of pure 100% passion. I don't really think about other things around it, which sometimes is good and then sometimes isn't so great, because when I start thinking about, you know, especially around music things too, but also obviously with this page and with how social media is, I I have this weird thing about, um, because there's the obvious thing of when you're starting a YouTube channel or you're starting some kind of presence online, you eventually you find a little bit of a demographic, and you find a little bit of an audience, and you start targeting and trying to lock into what those people want or need, and you try to build that fan base, and you try to you know exploit it to a degree, and you try to milk it, and you try to build that base, and you make things uh, very centric towards those people, or those people who have those kinds of tastes. Um, and then it becomes a thing of when obviously you kind of discover there are people who have your strange interests. You start, you know, getting into the whole marketing thing more and more, and about really strategizing how you come across as far as the production, the appeal, and all those things. And I have this weird thing. I mean, on one hand, I'm very limited um, as far as technology goes. I'm pretty slow to the game, and I have a lot of learning to do as far as that stuff goes. And I'm open to it, and I'm slowly learning more and more. I'm a very slow learner when it comes to this stuff. But I also have other things going on a lot of the time that take up my interest more, so I end up not putting in the time, say, to like really think about, okay, how am I gonna you know make this video look uh, extra special, say with like visuals and the heading, and putting graphics on all these things. On one hand, it's like I have other things that I do more, music related things that I'd rather put my time into, because I realize it takes me a long time to understand a lot of these newer things. But I'm more and more open to those things, and I realize it's a learning curve, and it's all, like everything, it's all about the learning process. And a lot of times that's great. And one of my downfalls is my lack of patience when it comes to technology. So, and I have a complicated relationship with it. But at the same time, I understand, I think I understand how the game works, and how other people that I know of who are on social media, whether it's for music or YouTube guys that I really like, or girls, I understand how they do it, and they do a pretty fantastic job, and they really can cater to their audience, and they really put that time into where it's like a full-time job. But the other part of my brain, it's a strange thing, and it might not make sense to most people, but it's a strange thing. The other part of my brain, when it starts becoming that thing of where I got to start thinking about an audience and people, if I connect with people who are into what I'm doing, then I'm trying to market things to that person, and it becomes this thing of other than just the pure passion of it, of just being a film fanatic or a music lover, or just something I'm really into. I start just kind of closing off. I don't really, because I have lots of broad tastes, and I have this funny thing where I just kind of close off to that, and I just automatically don't want to really do that, because I'm approaching most of these projects with, like, a degree of somewhat of a skill set, but then also lots of limitations. And I try to understand that, and I try to understand that I kind of like that I have some degree of limitations. But I realize that when it becomes this thing of where I'm going to try to target a particular audience because people are into a certain thing, and I just kind of close off to that. I don't really, I feel like I try to approach everything from a genuine passion and love, and a sincere place, and either people will like it or they don't, and they don't have to like it. But I appreciate the support. So I have this funny thing about that. I don't, when it kind of moves outside of that to a degree, and it becomes a thing of like a marketing ploy, and it takes on this business model. I don't know. I just have this weird thing of, I want to like do the opposite, or not work in those kinds of traditional perimeters, if that makes any sense. It's really strange. And I don't know, part of it is, I have like this very punk rock ethic thing of how the DIY thing is, where I'm used to doing a lot of things alone, and I like that, but then at the same time I realize you can't do everything alone, and you need to expand. And so that's a thing that I sometimes struggle with, and I go back and forth. And then also, if people kind of view what I do as, okay, he does one particular thing, and then that's what it is, and then they can kind of label that as being a specific thing. I have a real hard time with that a lot of the times. I try to, naturally it makes me almost want to do something different, and not become put in this box or with a label, if that makes any sense. But anyway, cheers, and thanks again. I appreciate the support I've been getting with the channel, and trying to keep the YouTube videos coming, and been having a blast doing it. And also, I appreciate the people, some friends getting back to me, and letting me know about how they think the quality is a lot better for these videos. So yeah, I'm going to be expanding more and more on these things, and I'm going to be doing. It's a little bit hard now, but once things start tapering off with gigs, at some point with the fall coming and the winter coming, I'm going to be hosting some private, like, film fanatic parties, where I'm going to put together some. Basically, it's an excuse to have a party, but I'm going to have it centered on, like, I'm going to pick out a couple of movies, and we're going to have like a watching party, and we're going to do it, here live in the flesh at my place, and it will be like like a private, semi-private event. Don't have a whole lot of space, but I have enough space that could, we could get a pretty good little group together, and we'll do we'll have a party and we'll have a movie watching um, uh, time, and that's what it'll be centered on. It'll be centered on getting together and watching some movies, and movies that I've like talked about a lot. So I'm going to be doing that in the fall, and I'm probably going to host them at my house. I might host them at another event, but I'm going to probably just do it at my place, and it'll be kind of a fun excuse to just have a party basically, and so that will be fun. And that will be happening in the next probably in the next couple of months. And as far as like getting back to some other quantum related news, yeah, we tomorrow on Sunday we have a show at AC Davis's place in Owl's Head, and it's going to be an all day festival. It's going to be starting at 1. We're going to be coming from another gig, so we're going to be playing at the. I think we might be the last band. So we're going to be doing a quantum set at around 7:30 tomorrow night for like an hour to 45 minutes. So pretty excited about that. We had tried. AC's a super cool guy. He's a great, wonderful musician. He tried to get us a couple of times to play there before, but due to scheduling issues, we were never able to do it. So, but we're going to do it tomorrow. So that'll be fun. And there's going to be, I think, a food truck, and there's going to be obviously a whole bunch of other bands playing. It's going to be a big variety. There's going to be an open mic in the middle of it, so people will, get to, get to play all together. And there's going to be a full sound system there, and also a PA. So that's going to be pretty nice as far as like the flexibility of being able to, try to load in and or just showing up and loading in and plugging in, and hopefully that goes okay, and then we can just play. Usually our gigs are we're pretty self-contained, but we pretty much do everything ourselves. We bring a little PA system and we plug everything in. It's pretty low maintenance, mostly chords. Things end up turning into like a spaghetti western at the end of it. That's mostly because of me. But tomorrow we won't be bringing a sound system because it will all be provided, which will be really cool. Usually that's not the case, so kind of looking forward to that. So yeah, and then also we had one big change. We have the Camden downtown party, which was scheduled, I think, was it September 3rd, which was the first Saturday in September, and that was going to be Quantum and my great friend Halsey, who also plays electronic music, and it was going to be his debut. But we had to move the date, and I just put a post on Facebook about that. So that's going to be, we moved it a month ahead, so it's going to be October 1st, and it's on a Saturday. And hopefully it's not too chilly out, but it's going to be in the same location in Camden, right next to River Ducks, the ice cream place in Camden. So we're going to be doing the party then, and so it'll be great. And I kind of think it's actually better that it's booked further away now, just because of it. It's sneaking right up. The date we did have was like coming up right away. So I think from a promotional standpoint and everything, this will be better to, to have more time to do. We'll have like a whole month basically, or a little over a month to promote the party. So really excited about that, and my great friend Halsey is going to be making his debut as an electronic artist, and it will be something to definitely check out and definitely to enjoy, because it will be pretty wild. It will be pretty wild. And that's going to be October 1st, the first Saturday and the first day of October. So that'll be fun. So, yeah. So this movie, one of the easily, it's always hard when people say, well, do you have a top 10 movie list, or a top 5 movie list, or top 20, which is probably more common. And it's always hard to say what movies are on that list, and it's always a tough thing. But like, and I think about those movies because there's certain movies I always go back to. There's certain movies I always watch. There's certain movies I've seen probably hundreds of times. Where I literally don't remember how many times I've seen it. Because I'm a pretty big movie collector. I buy movies and I watch them, and I always try to always check out new things, older things, and then new things that come out. But I generally have a habit of, like, if I like something, I'll watch it, constantly. I'll watch it, a couple times a month. But I over time I've seen certain films, hundreds of times, and it's for me it's almost like, if I like a band and I like their album, it'll be in constant rotation, and I'll just dive into it, and I'll over time I'll just get really familiar with it, and that's how I am with films. And just off the top of my head, some of my favorite films of all time are movies. Probably my favorite film of all time, which I did a show way back when on Film Fanatic, was The Godfather. That's probably my all-time favorite film. And other films that I can just think off the top of my head. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is one of my favorites of all time. Alien, Ridley Scott's film, the first Alien, is easily one of my favorites. I also love another movie which is a departure from other films that I cover, but All the President's Men with Dustin Hoffman, Robert Redford. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. Also, Halloween, the first one. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. Another movie directed by Ridley Scott, Blade Runner, one of my all-time favorite movies. There's a whole big list. Akira Kurosawa, who's one of my favorite directors of all time, Japanese director. Ron is probably my favorite out of all of his movies, and there's so many great ones, but that's probably my favorite. Trying to think if there's other ones that I can just run off the top of my head. Tourist Trap is another one, which is one of my all-time favorite, sleazy grindhouse movies. Private Parts is another one. I really, really love that movie. Such a messed up, disturbing film. Yeah, and so those are all, a whole bunch of them. But the one that's definitely up there, one of my all-time favorites, is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Um, this film is just, to me, one of the most iconic movies ever. I've seen this film like so many times I can't even count. I've seen it, I didn't see it till later, and I'll explain that. I didn't see it till I was in my 20s. Actually, I didn't see it till probably, yeah, I was in college, or I was in my 20s, mid 20s. I didn't see it until then. I didn't grow up with it. It's a strange thing, but I got obsessed with it when I saw it. I've seen it on, cable, DVD, and and then I have like a few different editions of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Blu-ray. For me, one of the most influential movies. And getting back to the quantum thing, since I talk a lot about that, and it's definitely movie related. Like I've said before, music and film, and even in a lot of ways more so than music per se, like albums or bands or whatnot, have a bigger influence on quantum. Movies have a bigger influence on quantum, almost more so. And the reason is because I learn a lot from watching movies, and it sounds a little funny or strange explaining it, or to maybe understand it from an outside perspective. But for me, I really learn a lot from film. Certain things I've learned from film, I really apply to music. And the reason, or the way I do that, is especially with quantum, is I learn about pacing. I like films that tend to be on the slower side. I'm a big believer in films that have, the idea of like what you don't see is actually more intriguing and leaves a lot of room for your imagination to try to imagine what you're actually seeing, or imagining what you would see if you did see it. And I love ambiguity. I love certain films where they don't necessarily have a happy ending, or a good or a sad ending, or a dark ending. They can be kind of ambiguous, and they just kind of leaves you in this melancholy kind of state. I've gotten that a lot from films. I like the aesthetics. I love the way a scene can be shot, like from a cinematic perspective. I love the aesthetics of around lighting and costumes, makeup, masks, and this theatrical element of films, the way it kind of can create or enhance a certain particular mood, and it can be something that might be, maybe a little bit over the top or something really really subtle. That's been always a great huge influence on Quantum, and obviously the other thing are film scores, soundtracks, film scores, movies that are synonymous with the music or vice versa. Case in point, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or a Halloween or Blade Runner, where the soundtracks are such a part of, and the film scores are such a part of that film that it's hard to separate the two. So all of that is very much like a huge influence on Quantum, as far as, for what it's worth, as far as like how the music is kind of put together, and then also what influences the music, and also the way we kind of try to present ourselves in a live setting. I don't really like. I mean, it's fine for people to do that, but I'm not a big fan of people who show up to a gig with jeans and a t-shirt. I kind of like people who, because you're putting on an event. It should be something special, it's celebratory, but then you're also like trying to create a persona on stage, which is a little bit of a different thing, and that you're trying to sell it as, visually it looks cool, or it can be appealing, or there's something about that aesthetic that can make people, interested, or maybe keep their attention. So I tend to like, performers who like put on a show, who will either dress up a little bit, or present themselves in an extraordinary way on stage that can kind of leave an impression. And a lot of that comes from, like, because I really love jazz. People like Miles Davis and like that. Like, that's a huge influence on me personally. But then also, jazz is a really big influence musically on Quantum, especially the last few years. But I've always taken that whole thing of where, you see these guys whenever the Miles Davis quintet or the quartet would go on stage and play, they all look like $1 million. Like, even before you hear a note, they just look great, and it creates this cool vibe of where you're just, at least from my perspective, you're just kind of drawn into it, and you're like, these guys look really cool and they're ready to go. So it just like pulls you in, and they're putting on a show, and it creates this aesthetic, this vibe, and it's professional. And I've always been a big fan of that, and like how bands should present themselves, whatever it is, whatever style. So I'm not really like into people who just kind of show up in their street clothes, and just show up with a t-shirt and a pair of jeans or shorts. And it's not that the performer or performers like need to wear, this $1,000 suit or anything, but it can be something subtle. So I'm a big fan. But taking that even a bit further, I'm a product of, like, the first band I grew up on was Kiss. They were the first like rock or metal band that I grew up on, and I still have a pretty deep love for Kiss. And it was obvious. My obvious attraction to them was the visual thing at first, because for me as a kid, reading comic books, when I first saw Kiss, it was this thing of like, wow, like these are real life superheroes, and they were totally taking you out of the mundane kind of existence that you were in, and this was like a show, and it was like really theatrical, and that was to me the biggest appeal. And so I've always been into that kind of aesthetic, as far as like going full bore into like a theatrical presentation. And I feel a lot of the times like that doesn't really happen as much there are a lot of bands that kind of do that now. Bands like Ghost and things like that. But I'm always been a huge fan of like a theatrical that creates like a ritualistic environment, and a real theatrical kind of aesthetic, where it's a show. And so for what we do with Quantum, that's a big thing. I mean, the last 2 years, like we don't really, all last summer and then this year, we don't really play any shows inside. We play them like most of our gigs are all during the day, and they're outside in the early afternoon. So, but so there's like obvious a limitation as far as like what you can do with lighting and those kinds of things. But in the past, and I still try to do it, um, I try to again, a direct influence from films is that we incorporate theatrical elements from films that I really love. We use I use different props. I have like toys and skulls, and it's all obviously an influence from horror films. We use streamers and various masks and wigs, and we try to put on like a theatrical show or something that is is a little bit different than from what you would normally see. But that is all taken from a direct influence from film. The use of mask and all those kinds of things, and trying to change the vibe of the room or the space, trying to create a certain vibe of the space, so it can kind of lend itself to maybe if people are enjoying it and maybe they're not or they're not into it, but if they are enjoying it, it will create this certain kind of vibe. So that's all taken directly from film. And the two biggest influences for me as far as film goes, as far as the two biggest films that have the biggest influence on Quantum, are is is definitely Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those two films in particular. Again, I love so many films, and there's like so many influences in the music that I really cherish. That it's probably too large to really name everything off. But those two films in particular are the two biggest influences on me as far as the overall vibe and creating a certain aesthetic with the mask, the lighting, and the music and the mood, those kinds of things. And I remember when we were first doing Quantum, and even when we were doing lots of shows inside, when it was a regular thing, like in indoor venues, we would use lighting and we would use lots of strobe lights and various things. And I remember getting to a point of where I was getting, there were certain scenes in Alien, for instance, the ship, the main ship in Alien, where everything takes place, is called the Nostromo. And the cinematography in that film is just breathtaking, directed by Ridley Scott. And where there's the use of all of these real intense yellow lights and strobe lights, and there's like these long kind of dark corridors, and there's a lot of smoke and there's a lot of darkness, but then there's some light, and there's a lot of cascading shadows. When we were playing shows pretty regularly inside, I would use lights to kind of create that vibe live, based off of the scenes that I saw that were taking place in the Nostromo. Using limited lighting resources, but trying to make it effective. And I would set up lights, and after seeing that movie, who knows how many times, I would try to actually model it off of that. And so that was a really huge influence. And I still, even though like now we don't really have the chance, or it's not really the place that we can do lighting per se, that's still a big thing because we do still use props and try to create a certain vibe, and that's still a big thing, uh, directly related from that movie as far as an influence. And as far as using masks and the like the psychological element, definitely for like my use of like wearing these like wacky masks during our show, that's directly taken from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So many great iconic monsters, or horror icons out there. You have like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Pinhead, and Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And there's so many of those iconic horror characters that I love. But I probably, at the end of the day, my favorite is Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Just because there's this level of where there's this like psychological element to that movie and to his character where he's he's like really there's this an androgynous. I've always gotten this like really androgynous kind of vibe from his character, and then also the pure insanity of his character, but then also where he is inside, he's just like a really terrified child. So there's like this weird passive aggressive thing, but yet he's like, he'll kill you in a heartbeat, but yet he's inside, he'll cry or feel completely alone in a second. So there's like this vulnerability to his character, and he's just completely insane. And so and his use of like basically the masks, the skin masks that he would use as Leatherface, and the vibe of that, and there's like a slight androgyny with the wigs and stuff. So that was a direct influence on my use of on Quantum as a whole, but then definitely the mask thing that we use. So yeah, it's such a great film, and so I owe everything to those two films as far as being huge influences on this wacky thing that we do called Quantum, and especially the music. So yeah, this getting into the movie itself. It's hard to believe how old this movie came out. It came out in 1974, a year before I was born. So, and it was obviously directed by Tobe Hooper. And it's funny because this movie has been so talked about and so respected, and so many things have been said about this movie. So I did a review of Texas Chainsaw when I first started this page, and it was actually probably one of the first reviews I did on Film Fanatic back when I first started it. And since then, the movies have grown more and more. It's a huge franchise now. There was just a recent remake or a sequel to Texas that came out on Netflix, and the popularity of it as a franchise, and even the original is huge. I mean, it's in its own weird, deranged way. It's just like as American as an American pie, American apple pie. Everybody has heard of this movie, and most people have seen it. And it's kind of like asking somebody. I almost feel it's at a level of like asking somebody, "Do you know who Michael Jackson is?" And somebody saying, "Who is that? I don't know. I'm not familiar with Michael Jackson." Like, that's probably not going to happen ever. And I feel like that's the same thing with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where this like gritty, raw, super low budget, completely disturbing movie kind of found its way and hit this audience that has this mass appeal across the entire planet, so everybody knows, even if they haven't seen it. That's like, do you know who Leatherface is? No, I never heard of him. Or have you heard of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I mean, it's one of the most iconic movies. And when this came out in 1974, like again, this was Tobe Hooper's first movie. He went on to direct some great movies, Life Force. He did the Stephen King adaptation, Salem's Lot, Poltergeist. He's done some fantastic movies, but this was his first movie, and this movie was so incredibly low budget. Like it predated. It set this precedent. And I think it's one of the most influential movies ever, by far. And the other thing that it always gets a lot of people have talked about it, but one of the things that it always gets a reputation for is how gruesome it is and how just graphic it is. And it's so funny because as many times as I've seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I always, after I watch it for the bazillionth time, I'm always like, you know what? They're actually, when it comes down to it, as far as the graphic nature of blood, say, or the slasher element, there really isn't very much. Like, you actually don't see very much blood. You really don't see very much gore. And even the violence in the film, there's not these, the scenes are relatively quick in comparison, say, to movies, say, like Hostel, or whatnot, or like the most recent Halloween that came out, which was like, you know just brutal killings from the beginning to end, and they show everything. But the thing that I'm always taken aback by Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the psychological element. I feel like visually you're not seeing all of this gratuitous violence like how people assume it is, but it's the aesthetic and the way this film was created and the rawness that really gets under your skin. But psychologically, I think it's one of the most hard hitting movies that's ever come out. I think in some ways it has more of a like I kind of feel like if I watch a movie like, say, Silence of the Lambs, which is an amazing movie, I kind of feel like that movie almost has more in common with Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a lot of ways, because it's not really gory. It's all psychological. But you're not really seeing all this incredible violence. You're as a viewer, these things are implied, and you're visualizing what is actually happening, or what's around, or what's you know you know in that dark alley, but you don't actually see it. So it's psychologically, but it puts you in that space, and it makes your imagination run wild. And I feel like Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of those movies that really did that. And it gets a reputation that it's just a gore fest, but it's really not. I feel like it's a total, like, psychological horror film, and it's complete. I remember watching it with a girlfriend years ago, and she had never seen it before, and she had heard about it. She'd heard about it growing up from other people that, well, if you're into horror movies, obviously it's one of the greatest movies, but it's super gory. It's like one of the most violent movies ever made. Blah blah blah. And we watched it. So she had reservations of she wasn't interested in really watching. She likes horror movies, but she wasn't into gore films or slasher films. And so she had all these reservations of not seeing it because of that. And and I remember when we sat down and watched it, she really loved it, but she was like blown away on how little gore there actually is, but how the psychological element was so disturbing, and it just left this impression. And again, I went back to that thing where it gave her space to imagine what was actually in that dark corridor. And she felt in some ways that was almost more effective. And it goes back to the whole kind of less is more aesthetic, where what you don't see sometimes, or what you don't hear, like the space in the notes and the music, and this, like Miles Davis was a master of that. Getting back to music, that can almost be more effective than what you actually hear, because it gives you a room of breath. And with film, it's the same thing, or particularly with this movie, it actually doesn't show you that much, but it gives you this big canvas to really lay out your imagination, and you can really get a different kind of an effect from it. So I always find that and again, like I said, every time I watch this film, I get that from people of like, or I get that from the film. It's like, wow, it's compared to a lot of films, and I love gory slasher films. Compared to most films, it's pretty tame as far as that goes. But again, it on the psychological level of really kind of when it dives into the complete lunacy around the family that is the central character of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's dialed up all the way, and it's so messed up and disturbing, and it's hard to watch. It's so intense. And and the other thing that's really funny with my history of watching films, like I've said before, I grew up, at an early age, I got exposed to a lot of horror films and science fiction films, with VHS, and then Beta, the tail end of Beta, and then obviously buying tons of movies. And my mom was always into, she liked a lot of horror films. She still does. And she exposed me to a lot of cool horror films, but she was also really into Alfred Hitchcock. So she was really into suspense films. So I remember as a kid watching Vertigo, or watching Psycho, or watching The Birds. But then we'd watch, like, I remember as a kid we'd go to see, uh, you know, some of the Friday the 13th movies. We watch those, or we'd watch, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, or the Halloween movies. And she loved those movies, and so we used to watch them together. And that's kind of how I was raised. But the funny thing is that the two movies my mom would never allow me to watch was The Exorcist, the first one, the original Exorcist, and also the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because she said, I remember she said that the reason that she wouldn't let me, she felt like the movies, like movies like Friday 13th, Halloween, like they were obviously like, um, entertainment. There was fiction, and it was, escapism, and it was fun, and it wasn't, really set in any kind of like, uh, it wasn't really showing any resemblance of our reality, but it was like fiction, and it was just kind of entertainment. But she felt the reasons, or the reason that she wouldn't let me watch movies like The Exorcist or Texas, was she felt that they were too real. They felt like you were watching a documentary, and it was too real, like you were actually seeing these people in these situations. And so I didn't get to see either The Exorcist or Texas until, again, I was in my 20s. And since then they've grown to be, just, you know, hugely, influential movies on me, particularly this one. And that's one thing I'm always reminded, like, I totally get that, because when you watch this movie, it feels like a documentary. Like you kind of get a sense that these people are actually going through this hell on earth, and that they're going through this, and this is real, because of the grittiness of the film, and just how raw it is, and just in your face, and the you know the incredibly low budget, and the hardships that they suffered when they shot this film. And Leatherface will always be, I think, one of the most iconic, played by Gunnar Hansen, will always be one of the most, iconic figures ever in history. And he passed away, probably about 8 years ago. And then Toby Hooper, the director, he passed away a couple of years ago. And which was a shame, because they were both like relatively young. And but I remember about 10 years ago, I was able to get Gunnar Hansen's autograph, and I have an autographed copy of his from. It's a picture of him as Leatherface, and I have an autographed copy of his, and that's something I will always hold on to. And yeah. So if you've never seen this film, I don't know what's wrong with you, but it's such an iconic movie. It's one of the greatest horror films ever. One of the most influential movies ever. One of the grimiest, nastiest, dirty, horror movies that there is too. It's such a trip. Every time I see it, there's like moments where I always get lost in it, and I'm always like, wow, like this movie is such a roller coaster, and it doesn't let up. It's just like once it starts, it's like you're on this horror roller coaster, and I just feel like it just you're in, you're not getting out of your seat. So yeah, 1974. It's hard to believe how old this film is, and it's it continues to be that film. in regards to the franchise, I love the second one, the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also directed by Tobe Hooper, and I love it in a way because it is so different, and it's like a black comedy. It's so wacky with Dennis Hopper. It's so strange and bizarre, but it's like a black comedy, and I love what I love about that movie. And a lot of people don't aren't really well. There's a lot of people who do love it, but there's a lot of people who were kind of expecting it or wanted it to be more with a serious tone, like the original, which is like ultra serious and realistic. But I love that Toby Hooper took an artistic risk with directing the second one and just went off in this completely different thing and tried to do something totally original, like with what he did with the original Texas. And so I really love that movie a lot, and I'll probably eventually do a show on that too. The other thing, as far as regarding the rest of the films or Texas as a franchise as a whole, where there's like numerous directors, different writers. Toby Hooper was not involved anymore. The cast was never involved anymore, and it just got further and further away. Not honestly, and I know those films are the rest of the films. The franchise as a whole is a very popular franchise. But I honestly say I'm not like I've seen all of the other films, and they're all like to me they're very forgettable, and they're all pretty. There's moments of them that are pretty good, but it's never something I crave to like watch again. I always go back to this one and the second one if I'm craving to watch some Texas movies. The other ones I just feel are, pretty subpar and kind of a mess. Certain things are cool about them. Like the remake was pretty decent, I thought, of this movie, but again, I always go back to these two, particularly this one. So this is Jason Dean from Film Fanatic. So if you get a chance, got to see this. One of the greatest movies ever. Peace.